Okay, well, so with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Daf Nun, and we are picking up on Mem Tes Amud Beis 49b. 49b, okay, it's been a while since I've worked this technology from my house, so hopefully, again, everything is coming through as it should be. So we are picking up Emirat Hashem on Mem Tes Amud Beis 49b, and we are picking up Emirat Hashem about 12 lines up from the bottom. Amar Rava. So Amar Rava, so remember again, just to orient ourselves a little bit, we've been focusing on the sugya. The Mishnah told us that Ksubas Isha is paid with Ziburis. There's actually a machlokes in the Mishnah, with one opinion that said the Tanakama said Ksubas Isha b'Ziburis, and Rabbi Meir said Af Ksubas Isha b'Beinonis. It's also Beinonis. Okay, so we have two different opinions. So the Gemara now, in yesterday's daf, we had the statement of Mar Zutra. Mar Zutra said, when is it that the ksuba of a woman is payable through Ziburis? When is that true? That is only true when she is collecting from Yisomim. But if halacha l'maisa, she is collecting from the husband, then halacha l'maisa, the ksuba is actually payable through Beinonis, through middle grade property. So that's the piece we're working through now. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rava Tashma, Rabbi Meir Omer Ksubas Isha b'Beinonis. Rabbi Meir says the ksuba of a woman is payable through Beinonis. I asks the Gemara Miman. So from who? From who? Who ultimately, again, who is she collecting it from? Ilim asked me if ultimately, again, she's collecting from the Yisomim. So lastly, the Rabbi Meir, how this not in front of me, Yisomim Elamin Aziburis. So how could that be? Because we have a principle already, the concept that whenever you're collecting from Yisomim, ultimately, again, that is always going to be with Ziburis, always going to be with inferior grade property. Elalav Mine. Rather, it must be from the husband. Must be from the husband. And you see from here again that when collecting from the husband, she collects from Beinonis. Only when collecting from Yisomim does she collect with Ziburis. To which the Gemara says, Mechlal d'Rabbanan Savri b'Ziburis. Sounds like according to the Rabbanan, she always collects with Ziburis, whether it's from the husband or from the Yisomim. To which the Gemara says, Lo, li'ola miyasmi, in reality, ultimately is talking about Yisomim, v'shayni ksubas isha mishum china, and ultimately, again, ksubas isha is different because of china, like we spoke about before. In order to go ahead and halacha l'maisa encourage women to go ahead and marry. So Chazal wanted to make the ksuba a bit more of an attractive proposition. Amar Abaye. So we'll say we're still not finished. Let's analyze this a bit more. So Tashma, hanizokin shaman lahen be'idis. So damages are paid through idis. Ubal chov bebeinonis. Creditors pay through beinonis. Uksubas isha b'ziburis. And ksubas isha is paid with ziburis. So miman. When we say that the ksuba of a woman is paid through ziburis, who is paying this ksuba? To which the Gemara says, Ilema miyasmi, if you say it's from the Yisomim, my iriya ksubas isha, afilu kol haninami. Remember again, what's unique then about ksubas isha? In general, again, whenever you collect from Yisomim, we've already established, collection from Yisomim is always done through ziburis. To which the Gemara says, Elalav mine, rather it must be talking about through the husband. And you see from here that even through the husband, she only collects from ziburis. And what's the case? So this is actually very interesting. Kigon shenaase arev liniske beno lebal chov beno ulksubas kalaso. What's the case? The case is a case of a father who becomes an arev. Now, what we're going to talk about, arev is a guarantor. So a father who becomes a guarantor for the damages of his son, for the debts of his son, and for the ksuva of his daughter-in-law, for the ksuva that his son would owe to his wife. V'hai kidine, v'hai kidine. Each of these cases are treated in accordance with their own framework of halacha. How so? Nizakinu ba'al chov d'mechayim gavu. So ultimately, damages and a credit and a debt which are collected during the lifetime of the damager or the credit or the borrower. Ihunami kimak v'kimechayim gami. So the father takes essentially the place of his son. And just like, again, damages are paid from idis, and ba'al chov is paid from beinonis, so too when the father guarantees his son's debts or damages, he pays in the same way. He pays in the same way. So the Gemara says, Ksuvas isha de la'achar misa gavia. So it's actually very interesting. The Gemara takes the position that the most common situation of ksuva payment is when the husband died. So since that's quote-unquote considered to be the normative case, ula'achar misa miman gavi miyasmi, and after the husband dies, who is she collecting from? She's collecting from the Yisomim. Ihunami ki magvi k'la'achar misa magvi. So too again, when she collects, she's going to collect from the guarantor in the same manner in which she would have normally collected after the death of her husband, which would have been from the Yisomim, which is Ziburis. But 1 second, we have a general principle that a guarantor for a ksuva is generally not obligated to make good on the ksuva. Now we'll discuss why that is. So we'll say, so in general, right, when you guarantee something, so you're on the hook for it in the event that the individual who you are guaranteeing for defaults. The exception to this rule, interestingly enough, is for ksuva. It's for ksuva. Halacha l'maisa, when it comes to ksuva, ultimately, again, even if someone commits themselves as a guarantor, they're still not on the hook. We'll see why that is. To which the Gemara says, bikablon. Oh, we're not talking about just a regular guarantor, it's about a kablon. I both say, let's talk about it just a moment. Ohev and kablon both translate the same way as guarantor. But in fact, there are two different types of guarantors. An ohev is a guarantor, but in order to activate the ohev, you first have to go to the borrower. It's only if the borrower defaults, then you could go to the guarantor. A kablon is a higher level guarantor. And with a kablon, the creditor could actually bypass the borrower altogether and go directly to the kablon. Interesting. So this makes sense according to the opinion. It says that a kablon is willing to commit himself, right? Willing to guarantee, even if the borrower doesn't have any assets. But according to the opinion who says that a kablon only commits if the borrower has property, what is there to say? Maybe at one point in time the borrower had, but then the property was literally flooded, it was destroyed. Or the other possible say is that while that may be true, that at the end of the day, a guarantor only commits to guarantee if the borrower has property, that's with a regular case. But a father is always willing to be mishabed himself, is always willing to commit himself for his son. It's such a profound statement, right? Everyone knows that when it comes to a son, when it comes to a child, a father, a parent is always willing to go ahead and commit himself. And what a profound statement in halacha, and what a profound statement in hashkafa. As parents, we know we would do anything and everything for our children, but the real message and real takeaway is, we know how much we would do for our children. Alachas kama v'kama, how much HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for us, his children. Kol legabe brei, when it comes to a son, shabude mishabed nafshe. Literally, I'll be mishabed myself. I'll give myself over. I'll do anything and everything I have to in order to allow my child to be successful. Incredible. Itmar. So I'll say, so just to be clear, we still have not answered our primary question, which is that when we speak about the collection of the ksuvas, remember again, the Mishnah said that ksuvas isha, but the Tanakama said that a ksuva is collected from ziburis. So we're trying to figure that out. Is that all the time, no matter who she's collecting from, whether it's from the husband or whether it's from the yisomim, or maybe ziburis is dafka from the yisomim, but when it comes that she collects from the husband, maybe that's beinonis. Se'ithmar, ariv the ksuva, when it comes to a guarantor for a ksuva, divrei hakol lo mishtabed. Everyone agrees that he's not chayiv. This is incredible. In other words, that even though, so just so you can imagine this, so let's say Reuven marries Rachel, and Reuven wants Rachel to feel secure in the ksuva. So what does Reuven do? He asks Shimon to guarantee the ksuva. Even though Shimon, quote unquote, committed to guaranteeing the ksuva, ultimately, again, that guarantorship in other words, if Shimon doesn't want to honor it, he does not have to honor it. If you look at Rashi, last Rashi on the daf, Divrei Akol lo mishtabed, chada da'arev ba'amahu, va'od lav midi chasra shalahotzia klum mishala. See, we're going to see essentially the logic. Well, let's see it inside. Top of nun. So the Gemara goes weiter. Kablon de balchov. What about a kablon of a creditor? So remember again, we spoke of this before. A kablon is a higher level guarantor, and that when it comes to a kablon, the creditor could totally bypass the borrower and just go right to the creditor. So the kablon, right? A person who is a kablon guarantor for a debtor, divrei hakol mishtabed. Everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, he is in fact on the hook. He is in fact on the hook for the whole amount. Ohev de balchov, the kablon de ksuva. What about the ohev of a balchov? So a lower level guarantor for a debtor, or a kablon, a higher level guarantor for a ksuva. So pligi, that's a machlokes. So one opinion says even if the borrower doesn't have any property, this higher level guarantorship still works. Others say no, the only time the guarantor commits himself is if the borrower or if the debtor has property. And I will say, what is the halacha? In general, again, I will say the halacha is that if a guarantor pledges a guarantorship, right? So a person guarantees a debt, guarantees a loan. So even if the borrower does not have property, the guarantee is still binding. And the kablon or the arev will both be chayiv, with one exception. Bar me arev diksuva, with the exception of an arev, which again is a lower level guarantor for a ksuva. The afagav the islay lo mishtabed. In that case, even if the husband ultimately does have property, the guarantor is not obligated. Why? My taima mitzvahu da'avid v'lo midi chasra. So also this is very interesting because we understand that when Shimon guaranteed the ksuva, was he really guaranteeing the ksuva? No. What was he trying to do? He was trying to facilitate marriage. He understood Rachel was nervous. He understood she needed guarantees. He was just trying to facilitate the mitzvah of marriage. And remember again, she doesn't lose anything by him not guaranteeing the ksuva or not. So therefore, again, that's the one exception. So in general, when you guarantee something, either as a lower level guarantor like an arev or a higher level guarantor like a kablon, even if the borrower, debtor, doesn't have property, you are still on the hook, with the exception of ksuva. Interesting halacha, that if you guarantee a ksuva, ultimately, again, that is not a binding guarantorship. Ravina. So Ravina says as follows. So remember again, Ravina is going back on the opinion that we saw before, the position of Mar Zutra, right? Mar Zutra said that Allah a woman collects. Remember, we're going back. A woman collects from Beinonis when she's collecting from her husband. Mar Zutra's opinion was she collects from Ziburis, lowest level property, when she's collecting from orphans, and middle grade property, Beinonis, when it comes to the husband. So Amar Ravina, Tashma, Meikara, Ditakantin, Yoser Mashi Ish Rotze Lisa, Isha Rotze Linase. So Ravina says as follows. From the beginning of this enactment, if you look at Rashi says over here, Meikar Ditakanta, second line down from the top, Mishoresh Tama Takana Diktani Mipnei Mak Suva Biziburis. So in general, let's take a step back. Why is it, so comes along Ravina and says, why is it that Chazal instituted that a woman only collects her ksuva from ziburis? Why is that? So Mar Zutra explains very simply, because more than a man wants to get married, a woman wants to get married. So therefore you don't have to incentivize marriage for a woman, because Lamaisa, she wants to get married anyway. Therefore, again, all she needs is a ksuva, even though it's only guaranteed by ziburis. If you think this is referring to collection from the yisomim, right? Ultimately, again, obviously, anytime you collect from yisomim, you're only going to get ziburis. So it must be that when we say she collects from ziburis, that's not only from yisomim, but also from what? From the husband. To which the Gemara says, Tiyufta de Mar Zutra, Tiyufta. This indeed refutes the view of Mar Zutra, and Mar Zutra is refuted. So I will say, so this indeed is the halacha. The Shulchan Aruch Paskins. The Shulchan Aruch Paskins at Choshe Mishpat Simen Kof Ches, that halacha lemaisa, a woman always collects her ksuva, ultimately again from ziburis. And this is true whether she is collecting ultimately from the husband or whether she is collecting from the yisomim, she always collects from ziburis. Incredible. Armar Zutra, Bereid Rav Nachman, Mished Rav Nachman. Shtarchov hayosi ali yisomim. So we'll see an interesting case. Let's say there is a shtarchov. So in other words, just to illustrate this case, Yaakov lent money to someone. We'll just call him Lova. He lent money to a borrower. Yaakov dies. So now, ultimately, again, I'm sorry, actually, I take it back. Just the opposite. Someone lent money to Yaakov. We'll call him Malva, right? Lender lent money to Yaakov. Yaakov died. Now, Yaakov's estate is inherited by his sons, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Malva, lender, now comes to collect the debt. Now, what's interesting over here is as follows. Now, let's say, in the document itself, Yaakov the father and Malva the lender, they agreed that Malva was going to collect from Idis. So it says it in the document. So now Malva is showing up ultimately to the Yisomim with a document that says, I get to collect Idis. So what's the halacha? Eino gova ela min haziburis. The halacha is, he only collects from ziburis. Right? In other words, this is true, even though you have a document that entitles the lender to collect from Idis, since halacha l'maisa, this is a collection from Yisomim, from orphans, therefore halacha l'maisa is only going to collect from ziburis. Incredible. Amar Abaye says, Teda, the balchov dina bebeinanis. And again, you have a simple idea. A general creditor has the ability to collect from beinanis. Umiyasmi beziburis. And ultimately, again, from Yisomim, that same creditor could only collect ziburis. So the point that Abai is trying to make is it's not such a novelty. Essentially, what Chazal legislated is no matter what the nature of your transaction, if you are collecting money from Yisomim, you are going to collect from ziburis and that as well. So Rav says, 1 second. In reality, Mida Oraisa, a balchov, a creditor, should only collect from ziburis, right? In accordance with what Ula said, the Amr Ula, Devar Torah, balchov beziburis. In reality, a balchov, a creditor, should only collect beziburis. Why? How do we know this? The pasuk says, Shneimar, bachutz ta'amod va'ish. So Rabbi said, this is actually talking about over here the taking of collateral. And the Torah says, if you would lend someone money and you now want to take collateral, you could take collateral, but you have to wait outside the borrower's house and allow him to bring out to you the collateral. Don't go into his house to seize the collateral. So the Gemara says, Bachutz tamot, stand outside. Mad darko shalish lahotzi. So if you're waiting for the borrower to go ahead and bring out collateral, what kind of things does a person normally bring out? Pacho shevikelim. Ultimately, again, his ziburis. His lowest grade property. So what do you see from here? You see from here that midda orais on a biblical level, balchov, a creditor, is only entitled to collect from ziburis. Umatam amru balchov bebeinonis. So if that's the case, then why did Chazal say that a balchov, a creditor, gets to collect from beinonis? Kadesh lo tinol delas bifnei lav. We saw this already before. Because we'll say Chazal were concerned that if Allah Chalamaysi, you lend someone money, and the only thing you're entitled to collect from is ziburis, that people aren't going to want to lend money. So therefore, in order to encourage people to lend money, what did Chazal say? You could collect from beinonis. Okay, so this is actually very interesting about say. So according to Ula, the da'oraisa by a creditor is that you collect from ziburis. Midrabanon, we allow you to go ahead and collect from beinonis in order to encourage and facilitate the making of loans. The gabi yasmi okmur rabbanan da'oraisa. So this is actually a very interesting perspective when it comes to Yisum, when it comes to orphans. Chazal just simply reinstituted the law in accordance with the da'oraisa, with the biblical law, telling you that Allah Chalamaisa, you could only go ahead and collect from ziburis. Ziburis, incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Elahacha kevan. So I'm sorry. V'gabi yasmi ukmi rabbanan daraisa. All right, sorry. Second over here. Okay. So therefore, the Gemara says as follows: V'gabi yasmi ukmi rabbanan daraisa. I Elahacha kevan dedine midaraisa beidis. Afilu miyasmi nami beidis. But if that's the case over here, I will say that, remember, in this case, halacha l'maisa, you have a shtar, right? At the end of the day, let's go back to our original case, right? Yaakov the father borrowed money from Malva, and they agreed between the two of them that Yaakov was going to repay this with Idis. Now Yaakov dies, Malva comes with the shtar to the Yisomim, to the orphans. You have a document that says that Malva is entitled to Idis. So doesn't that create a biblical obligation for Idis? To which the Gemara says, "Miyasmi nami beidis ulu Rava va'atani Avraham choza eimifram min nechsesom elamin aziburis va'afilu hein nizakin." Yet we saw that Rava said, right? And they quote Avraham choza that whenever you collect money from the Yisomim, you're only going to collect ziburis, even if it's a matter of damages. So the Gemara says, 1 second, but we just said before that damages collect idis midaraisa. Hachama asking on what's the case? Kegon shahaise idis denizek kiziburis demazik Rabbi Shmuel. Oh, like yesterday Zahra was saying. Now what's the case? The case over here is where the idis of the nizak, right, the idis of the damaged party, ultimately again is like the ziburis of the mazik, and in accordance with Rabbi Shmuel. What did Rabbi Shmuel say? Da'amar mid'araisa bidin nizak shaminon. Rabbi Shmuel says that mid'araisa, we go ahead and we assess damages in accordance with the idis of the nizak, of the damaged party, and ultimately, again, for the benefit of society, we flipped it in order to make people a bit more vigilant, and we said you pay with the idis of the mazik. When it comes to Yisomim, ultimately, again, I will say, we go ahead and we establish things with the daraisa, and that's why, again, you'll collect from ziburis. Okay, Ini. So the Gemara says, really, is this so? Is this so? So I'll say, so where the Gemara is holding right now is, it sounds like that if the father made a transaction, made a deal with the lender that allows the lender to collect idis, the lender will be able to do that even from the Yisomim. Is that true? Vatani Rabbi Elazar niosa ein nifra'in min nichseisom ela min haziburis va'afilu hein idis. You can only collect from the property of the Yisomim from ziburis, even if they're idis. Now, what does that mean? Ma'afilu hein idis. Lav afagav dechsiv idis b'shtara. Does it not mean that even if there is a loan document against the estate that entitles the lender to collect from idis, still, when it comes to the estate of the Yisomim, you can only collect from ziburis, and that's all. To which the Gemara says, "Lo, my idis." Excuse me. What's idis? Shafai idis. So I'll say, what's shafai idis? If you look at Rashi, la'achar hezek v'adayin yesh lo idis ubeinonis v'ziburis ela shazu haisi yafem ma'od. So what's shafai idis? Shafai idis means a person had a field that was idis. But now, ultimately, again, that field becomes uncollectible, right? Becomes, for whatever the reason, right? It was damaged, so therefore it's no longer usable. But Lamaisa, now he's left with Beinonis and Ziburis. Kidrava da Amarava, Hezek Ziburis, Gova Minaidis. Right? Ultimately, again, I will say, Salach Lamaisa, even if a person went ahead and damaged Ziburis, ultimately, again, they have the ability to collect from idis. Shafai idis, what happens if the idis is gone? Gova mina beinonis. Ultimately, again, you collect from what you have, which is the beinonis. The gabi yasmi ukmi ad da'oraisa. But ultimately, again, for Yisomim, they established it on the da'oraisa. Fine. So again, this piece is still open-ended. So I just want to point out, I will say, so let me kind of, the end of this discussion, let me say, so the end of this discussion, the Shulchan Aruch, same siman, in Choshen Mishpat siman Kuf Ches, Halacha Yud Ches, writes as follows: Ein nifra'in min nichsei yarshim afilu gdol ela mi'aziburis. Va'afilu hisna sheyigba idis o beinonis lo mahani tina gabayu, then kasav befeir sheyigba idis o beinonis mimenu or miyasher natana. So also listen to this. So this is very interesting. So halacha l'maisa, the way we paskin, is that whenever you are collecting from the Yisomim, from the estate, you're always going to collect from Zibur. So by the way, we've already established that this is true by Ksuba. Right? Ksuba is also always going to collect Zibur from the husband or from the Yisomim. But in general, whenever you're collecting from Yisomim, it's always going to be Ziburis. What about this case? What about the case where the father, Yaakov, borrowed money and agreed to repay the creditor with idis? Now Yaakov dies, creditor shows up with the document that says, Yaakov owes me idis. So what do you do with this? So the Shulchan Aruch makes a very interesting distinction. The Shulchan Aruch says, if the agreement to pay idis was just that tonight was a verbal agreement, then ultimately it is unenforceable with the estate. Even if it's not contested, it's simply unenforceable, right? You cannot go ahead and collect anything more than ziburis from Yisomim. The exception is if the creditor comes with a document, right? The Shulchan Aruch says, "V'im kasav beferish sheyigba idis o beinonis mimenu o miyarshe mahanitina." So I'll say, if the document explicitly says, I, Yaakov, am borrowing money from Malva, from lender, $10,000, and I agree to pay back from idis, right? And ultimately, again, from myself or from my inheritors, and he writes that, myself or my inheritors, then that document will actually hold up in a court of law, and that'll be a case where we'll be able even to collect either beinonis or idis, whatever is written in the shtar. So just an interesting case. So although the overarching principle and rule is that halacha l'mais you can only collect from ziburis, ultimately of Yisomim, but if the lender produces a document, and in the document, the borrower, who is the deceased father, promised to repay idis from himself or from his inheritors, then enachinami, the creditor, could collect idis even from the estate of the Yisomim. Very interesting. So again, the Mishnah said, whenever collecting from Yisomim, you only collect from Ziburis. So Yisomim sha'amru kitanim or afilu gidolim. So it's very interesting. When we have this takana, when we have this concept that you can only collect from Yisomim with Ziburis, so is this a din for children, like for Yisomim who are children, kitanim, or even for Yisomim who are adults? So the Gemara says, Takanti da avarabana gabi yasmi, liktani avarabana likdon la avarabana. So on one hand we can say, listen, this is a form of protection, right? Children who are orphaned, again, need protection from the legal system. Need to be protected by the legal system. So therefore, perhaps this was dafka takana for Yisomim who are minors, who are children, to protect them, but not necessarily for adults. On the other hand, to Odilma, Mishum Dolo Masik Adaita Demilva Demis Lova, Venafal Nechasi Kamiyasmi, to Havlin Do Noel Deles Hilchach Afilu Gidol Nami. So this is very interesting. Remember again, we said before, in reality, Midaraisa, a creditor should really collect from Ziburis. Chazal went ahead and taken all of them and said, a creditor collects from Beinonis. Why? In order not to close the door in front of lenders. In other words, if a lender knows he's only collecting from Ziburis, so ultimately again he's not going to want to lend money. So maybe that logic doesn't apply in a case where the borrower died, right? Because when I lend Ruvain money, I don't have in mind that Ruvain's going to die. So therefore, if Ruvain does die, let's say he does die, and now I'm only able to collect from the Ziburis of the Yisomim, that's not going to disincentivize me from lending money in the future, because that's such a far off occurrence. If that's the case, then maybe the takana to only collect from Ziburis of Yisomim should apply to adult and children alike. Interesting. To which the Gemara says, Tashmas, let's analyze this. The Tani Abai Kshish, Yisomim Sha'amru Gidolim Bein Tzarech Lamer Kitanim. Right? When Abai said, the Yisomim that we're talking about is certainly talking about adults and all the more so children. I have a Dilma Hanimi in Shvuah. Maybe that's talking about a shvuah, swearing. In other words, in general, there's another halacha that if you want to collect from the estate of the Yisomim, you have to take an oath. You have to take an oath that you are actually owed money. To which the Gemara says, why? Because Lamaisa, again, a child, right, even an adult heir, when it comes to the estate or the affairs of his father, he's like a child. Right? In other words, we'll say there's no reason to assume that an heir, even if he's a fully mature and capable adult, is aware of the estate or the affairs of the estate of his father. So therefore, again, maybe when it comes to shvuah, if you want to collect from the estate, then halacha l'maisa, you're going to have to take a shvuah for everyone. Aval le'inyan ziburis lo. But maybe when it comes to collecting from ziburis, that was dafka halacha that was instituted for minor heirs, for children who are heirs, children who are yisomim, but not for adults. So we'll say, so again, just to reframe the question. Here's what we know, right? Here's what we know. We know that there's a halacha. Whenever you're collecting from yisomim, you are only going to collect from ziburis. That's the way Chazal instituted it, right? So machlok is darai said, okay, that's the halacha. You're only going to collect from ziburis. Now the shaila is, was that takana only enacted for Yisomim, for orphans who are children? Or does it even apply to Yisomim ultimately again who are adults? That's the shaila. V'hilchasa, the Gemara says, Amud Beis, Yisomim sha'amru, the Yisomim, the orphans that we're talking about, Gedolim, Bein Tzarech Lamer Kitanim, Bein L'Shvuah, Bein L'Zibur. So we'll say, here is the halacha, this halacha, both, that you could only get paid from Ziburis of the estate, and that before getting any money from the estate of Yisomim, you have to take a shvuah, you have to swear that you haven't been paid. That halacha applies no matter what the age of the inheritors. So whether the inheritors are adults, whether they're children, halacha l'maisa, whenever you are collecting from the estate, it is only going to be ziburis, and halacha l'maisa, you can only collect with the shvuah. And I will say, there's a beauty in that last phrase, in the second to last line in Amid Aleph, where the Gemara says, "The gadol b'mili da'avua kikatan dami." Now, on a halachic level, what does that statement mean? That ultimately, again, even an adult child, when it comes to the affairs, right? When it comes ultimately, again, to the transactions of his father, he doesn't necessarily know what's going on. So even a real adult when it comes to the affairs of his father, kikatan dami. So you could also understand that phrase so beautifully, b'derech hashkafa. The gadol, a person could be, a person could look at themselves and they could say, oh, I'm accomplished, I've done so much, I've learned so much, I've accomplished so much, I've earned so much, I've done it, mitzvahs, Torah, gashmias, ruchnias. You know what the incredible thing is? No matter how much of a gadol a person may be in the eyes of the world, b'mili de'avua, when it comes to the service of the Ribono Shel Olam, when it comes to matters of the Father, kikatan dami, I'm still a child. And I will say it's one of the most overwhelming and sobering thoughts that no matter how much I've accomplished, right? Sometimes a person can be like, in the eyes of the world, right? I have all of these accomplishments, right? All of these letters before my name, all of these letters after my name, all of these possessions, all of these accounts, all of these accolades, all of this prestige, right? So in the eyes of the world, I'm a gadol. Yet, if I'm honest with myself, if I introspect, when it comes to my service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when it comes to who I am as a Jew and who I could really be, b'mili da'avua, when it comes to matters of my Father, matters of ruchnius, matters of holiness, matters of avodas Hashem, kikatan dami. I'm only a child. I have so much more work to do. I have so much more to accomplish. I have so much more to become. We'll say, there's no time to lose. No matter how much we've accomplished, we should give ourselves a shkoyach for our accomplished. Because again, maybe in our own right we have become gidolim. Maybe I have become a gadol in certain ways. But no matter how much gadlus I've acquired or amassed for myself, b'mili de'avua, when it comes to our relationship with Hashem, kikatan dami, I'm just like a child getting started. So much to do, so much to accomplish. How we should be zochah mirat Hashem to get to where. So let's go weiter. Nun Amud Beis 50b, second line down. Both say very interesting halacha, which at least will start today. So this is actually quite interesting. So there's a general concept I will say that, remember, if the easiest way maybe to illustrate this is even in the case of a loan, right? So if you could imagine Reuven lends Shimon $10,000. What happens when Reuven does that? Reuven essentially has a lien against Shimon's property. Now what that means is when the loan comes due, if Shimon doesn't have cash to go ahead and pay back the debt, what could Reuven do? Reuven could go ahead and seize property to satisfy the debt. Now, what's even more incredible is if after the debt, Shimon went ahead and sold off property, and let's say now Reuven lent money to Shimon, right on the first of Tammuz. Fine, $10,000. So now Shimon's property is encumbered. Shimon sells off all of his property. So now the loan comes due, on the first of Av. Shimon doesn't have any money, doesn't have any property. So what's the halacha? Reuven could go and then seize property from people who Shimon sold to after the debt was made. Because essentially Shimon sold encumbered property, and Reuven has the ability to seize that from the purchaser in satisfaction of his debt. But there's a but. What's the but? That when can you go ahead and seize sold property? That's what we call nechasim mishubadim. When can you seize that? When the borrower doesn't have any property that he owns. In other words, Jose, if you can imagine, if Reuven lends Shimon $10,000, right? The loan comes due on the first of Av. Shimon doesn't have any money. Shimon has a parcel of land. He has land, and it's enough land to satisfy debt. But Reuven says, I don't like that land. I like the other land that I had a lien on that you sold. So I'm going to go seize that land from the purchaser, and says that you can't do. That's what it means. In Ephraim, in nechasim mishubadim, b'makom sheyesh b'nei chorin. Halacha l'maisa, you cannot go ahead and seize sold property, right? Sold property when there is unencumbered owned property. I should say, or where there's owned property. It's all encumbered where there's owned property. Okay. Listen to this. B'matana heich heich. So we'll say, what about by matana? Now, what's the case here? Take a look at Rashi. So Rashi, I will say, Rashi is second line down on top. Matana heich. Listen to this. Im shibud shal mishubadim halalu enenu machmas mecher ela shenasnam b'matana la'achar shalava mizeh v'shir b'ziburis lapanov heich migmi b'ziburis b'nechor umninis b'shad. So we'll say, watch this. This is actually a fascinating case. Same thing. Reuven lends Shimon $10,000. $10,000 on the 1st of Tammuz. It's a 1-month loan. Okay, so now everything, of course, that Shimon owns is encumbered, right? The real property is encumbered to the debt. Watch this. Shimon has 2 fields. A Beinonis field and a Ziburis field. Okay, so what happens? Shimon gifts the Beinonis field. He gifts it away. So now, when it comes time for the loan is due on the 1st of Av, so Reuven comes collect his debt. Shimon has a field. The Ziburis field is worth $10,000. But Reuven says, I don't want the Ziburis field. I want the Beinonis field. Because remember again, halach l'maisa, creditor is permitted to collect from Beinonis. So I'd like the Beinonis field. Now, I'll say one second, we just learned. You could only seize property to satisfy a debt when there is no property currently owned by the borrower. But this is a different case. In this case, Shimon didn't sell property, he gifted the property. So we'll say, here's the shaila. Can Reuven claw back the gift in order to satisfy his debt with Beinonis? Or is the gift essentially treated like a sale? And as long as Shimon has property to go ahead and satisfy the debt, even though the property in question is Ziburis, that's what Reuven is going to have to accept as payments for the debt. Such a great kasha. To which the Gemara says, on one hand, why did Chazal say that you can't claw back sold property? Because you're putting the purchasers at a disadvantage. But by a matana, the recipient of the gift didn't do anything, right? So let Reuven claw back the gift. In other words, you're not putting the gift recipient at a disadvantage. He got something for free. Oh, Dilma, matana nami, this is incredible. Matana nami ilav de isle hano amine lo yav le matana. Both say, you know how the way that gifts work? This is incredible. How do gifts work? Generally, you give a gift to someone because either you owe them something or because you want something from them. We'll say it's a very profound insight into gift giving. You know, that's why Chazal do tell us, Sonei matanos yichya. You know, those who despise gifts will go ahead and live a long life. Because often, I'll say it's not all the time, there are, of course, altruistic gifts. And altruistic gifts are just simply an expression of love, right? Again, husband gives a wife a gift, a friend gives another friend a gift. Those could be pure altruistic expressions of love with no strings attached. No strings attached. But often, when a gift is given, it's given either in appreciation of something that has been done, or potentially with an expectation of something which will be done. And therefore, clawing back a gift is not just simply clawing back something that, who cares? In other words, there's a transactional piece to that as well. And maybe again, clawing back a gift is no different than clawing back a purchase. So just like if you claw back the purchase, so ultimately again, the purchaser loses out. If you claw back a gift, not only does the recipient, but the giver potentially loses out as well. And therefore again, maybe Reuven should only be able to collect from the Ziburis that Shimon currently owns. Interesting is here, say Amar. Tnuma Saim Zuz Laploni, the Gimel Meos Laploni, the Dala Meos Laploni. So listen to this. That was Shchimira. We'll say, remember again, who's a Shchimira? A guy in his deathbed. Guy in his deathbed says like this: give 200 zuz to Reuven, 300 zuz to Shimon, 400 zuz to Levi. Ein omrim kala kodem bishtar zacha, lefichach yotza alav shtarchov gova mikulan. So Rabbi say this is very interesting. So now, halacha l'maisa, how do we distribute this gift? So Rabbi say, we don't say, well look, since he said Reuven first, Shimon second, and Levi third, that Reuven gets precedence, right? Reuven collects his, then whatever is left from Shimon he gets, and then whatever is left Levi gets. Rather, Rabbi say, the way we view this, if you take a look at Rashi says, in Omru Kala Kodem Mishtar, Rashi says, Sava'a Zacha Likadem Shelo Yitlu Achronim Elamash Shir Harishon Shim Yachsa Shlo Yimtzu Sham Kolkach Lo Ye Nifser Harishon Halo Amran Decheban Dolo Amar Acharav Leploni Lav Dafa Akadme El Shef. Let's listen to this. This is incredible. So, watch this. Shchiv Meira is saying, give 200 zuz to Reuven, 300 zuz to Shimon, and 400 zuz to Levi. So I will say, so again, you've got 500, right? 900 zuz, right? Ultimately, again, right? Yeah, 900 zuz in this. We'll say, so let's say for argument's sake, the estate only has, or Shchiv Meira only has 700 zuz. So, you say, okay, no problem. Give Reuven his 200, give Shimon his 300, and I guess Levi will only get 200 instead of 400. The Gemara says that's not the way it works. What Shchimira actually means to say is, I want to give all of these guys and I want them to share equally. And if for argument's sake there's not enough money in the estate, then let them split up what there is proportionally according to the amounts I gave them. In other words, if you're asking what does Shchimira want to do, Shchimira wants to simultaneously say, Reuven 200, Shimon 300, and Levi 400. But you can't say three things at once, so therefore he has to say it consecutively. But he doesn't mean for any one of them to have higher standing than the other. As a result of this, therefore both say, if after distributing the money, and then it turns out, let's say Shchimira dies, and let's say again there's a creditor who comes, so all three share proportionally in going ahead and satisfying the debt. However, Avalim Amr Tnu Masayim Zuz Laploni. The Achar of Laploni, but listen to this. In this case, Shchimira says, give 200 to Reuven, and afterwards give 300 to Shimon, and afterwards give 300 to Reuven. So I will say, what's different in this case? Acharov. In that case, what he's doing over here, I will say, is he's showing that really, the goal over here is first pay off Reuven, then go ahead and pay off Shimon, and then pay off Levi. Lefichach, the Gemara says, Kol HaKodem Bishtar Zacha. So we'll say in that case, if there's not enough money in the estate to satisfy all of them, we pay them off in sequential order. So first he makes sure that Reuven gets his 200, Shimon's going to get his 300, and whatever is left over will go to Shimon as a result. Lefichach, Yatalav Shtarchov, if after Shchimira dies and the money has been dispersed, Gova Mina Acharon. Listen to this. This is what I will say. If Shchimira dies, and now let's say again someone comes to collect money from the estate, so what's the halacha? Who do they collect from? They collect from Levi first. Why? Because Levi was the last one to get property from the estate. So in other words, when Reuven got his, there was unencumbered property. When Shimon got his, there was unencumbered property. Levi was the last one to get here, and when he got his, there was no more unencumbered. So therefore, if a creditor comes, he first goes to Levi. If Levi doesn't have, Ein lo, Goldman Mishalafonov, then I'll go to Shimon. Ein lo, if Shimon doesn't have, Goldman Mishalafonov, then ultimately again I'll go to Reuven. The Afal Gav, now what's the Chiddush over here? What's the Chiddush? The Afal Gav, the Kama Benonis, Ubasra Ziburis, Miziburis Gabi, Mi Benonis Logabi. Now we'll say, here's what's interesting. Lamaisa, this might be true even if one of them has Benonis, one of them has Ziburis, and one of them, right? Again, that doesn't make any difference. You see from here that halacha lamaisa, what we say is like this: the only time you are permitted to go ahead and claw back property is when there is nothing left either with the debtor or with the estate, irrespective of the quality of that which is left over with the debtor, with the estate. That's what you take from. If there's free property, that's what you collect from. Only if there is no free property, ultimately, again, can you go ahead and claw back. Now, I'll say, what do you see from here? This is a case of matana. This is a case of gift, right? The Shchimira is gifting property. And yet, despite that, what do you see? That we look at a gift like a sale. And therefore, even if, so going back to our original case, remember again our original case, where halacha l'maisa again, right, Reuven lent Shimon $10,000, Shimon has all of his property, or let's say two parcels of property. One is Benonis and one is Ziburis. Shimon gifted the Benonis property, now he's left with Ziburis property. The Ziburis property happens to be worth $10,000. Reuven says, I don't want that, I'm going to claw back the gift. You see from here that you can't claw back a gift, that a gift is treated like a purchase, and therefore, again, if there is unencumbered property, that's what you have to collect from, even if it's from Zibur. Shmamina, b'matana nami abud rabbanon takanta. So what do you see from here? That even in the case of a gift, so even if the borrower, even if the debtor gifted property, still even with all of that, halacha l'maisa, the creditor would not be permitted to claw back a gift when there is unencumbered property, in the same way that he can't claw back a sale when there's unencumbered property. Gemara says, one second. The case of Shchimira is different. What's the case of Shchimira? The Balchov. Both said the case actually when he's giving money to Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, the Shchimira, those are actually his creditors. Gemara says, really? Bahat Tenu Ka'amar. It says Tenu, give them. Tenu is like a lashon of a gift. Tenu b'chovi. He meant give them in satisfaction of my debt towards them. Wow. So let's just see, let's see who has the earlier note. In other words, if Reuven, Shimon, Levi, who has the earliest debt? The lekashtara. Ultimately, again, there's no shtar. It said whoever has the first star, bishtar pakadata. We're talking about over here shtar pakadata. What shtar pakadata meant, this was the shtar in which the shchiv meirah said, go ahead and pay these individuals. The other possibility is afilu matana nami. Even by a matana, it can be true as well. Below kasha, my government achron. What does it mean that you collect from the last one? Ein nifsad ela achron. Ultimately, again, the only one who loses out, halacha l'maisa, is the achron. The other possibility is the shava kul hula adadi, that all of them are treated equally. So we'll say, bottom line, halacha l'maisa, how do we pass it? So we'll say, first of all, here, the Rambam in Hilchos Malva and Lova, Perek Yutes, halacha beis says asal. So we'll say, this is the halacha l'maisa. Ein nifra'im min nechasim mishubadim b'makom sheyesh nechasim b'nei chorin. So Rabbi say this is an incredibly important halacha. In general, we only allow you to. Rabbi say, so remember again, what's nechasim mishubadim? Nechasim mishubadim is property that is encumbered but has been sold. So once more, let's just illustrate the case. Reuven lent Shimon $10,000. Okay, at the time of the loan, Shimon owned property. Right, the borrower, debtor owned property. As a result, all of Shimon's property is encumbered to the debt. Now, I will say, you could sell encumbered property. That's not a problem. The buyer obviously should be aware of that, but you can sell encumbered. So what happens? Now, Shimon sells property. Loan is due. Reuven comes to collect. Shimon has no money. So Shimon is going to pay in property. So I will say, so what is the halacha? If Shimon has property that is still in his possession, that's what Reuven has to take payment from. Right? And now what's the chiddush in that? Remember again, what type of property could a creditor collect from? A creditor could collect from Beinonis. Let's say for argument's sake, the only type of property that Shimon has is Ziburis. Nevertheless, if that's what Shimon has, then that's what Reuven gets. As long as there's enough of it to satisfy the debt, Reuven cannot claw back any sold property if Shimon has property in his possession, even if it's ziburis, as long as it is enough ultimately to go out and satisfy the debt. If, however, Shimon sold off all of his property, so now when Reuven comes to collect debt, Shimon has nothing, then I will say, then Reuven is allowed to claw back any property that was sold after the date of the transaction. In other words, any property owned by Shimon at the time of the transaction is encumbered, and if it was subsequently sold and Shimon has no additional property, Reuven could claw that back to go ahead and satisfy the debt. So that's how the Rambam writes, you can't claw back sold property in a place where the borrower, the debtor, still has property in his possession. Or idis, bein shenasna machram, bein shenasanam. So we'll say here it is. And Allah the Rambam says it makes no difference whether Shimon went ahead and sold it or gifted it. A gift is looked at as a sale, and therefore halacha l'maisa, even if Shimon gifted away the property. So again, let's analyze. So again, if Shimon gifted away some of the property, but is still possesses some property, even though the property he's left with is ziburis, is inferior, if there's enough of it to satisfy the debt, that's what Reuven takes. If, however, again, Shimon went ahead and either gifted or sold all of his property, then in that case, halacha l'maisa, Reuven will have the ability to reclaim that property ultimately in satisfaction of the debt. All right, I will say, shkoyach, what an incredible and overwhelming and beautifully magnificent daf. We will stop over here for today. Meretz Hashem will pick up with the new sugya tomorrow. Should we start? Yeah, we'll stop over here at the 2 dots. Both say shkoyach, incredible. See everyone tomorrow.